Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:49. We'll speak more about Nadim Zahawi and the inquiry into his tax situation in a moment. But it is right when the police get things wrong, as they have done recently, that we cover them. So it's only fair when they seem to bring off quite a successful operation, we give that due coverage as well. And I read here that more than 170 arrests were made during a 3-day crackdown targeting serious criminals to help take drugs and weapons off the streets. And let's be honest, we all celebrate that. More details now from Conservative MP and Crime and Policing Minister Chris Philp, who joins me. What can you give us the tale of the tape here then, Minister? What has been achieved by the officers? Good Operation Pandila, I believe it was called. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, we've been piloting an approach called Clear Hold Build, which is designed to target organised criminal gangs who blight so many communities with drug dealing and often violent crimes. Those pilot areas have included Merseyside and West Yorkshire, and they've delivered significant results, some of which you just mentioned a second ago. In Merseyside, in fact, the total number of arrests they've achieved over the pilot period was 420. They seized 11 firearms and impounded 90 vehicles. And in West Yorkshire, where they trialled this approach, they managed to cut burglary in the target area by 57%, and they cut drug offences by 27%. And they've done that by targeting these organised criminal gangs, arresting them, getting them put in prison, then holding the area to make sure other criminal gangs don't move in, and then thirdly, trying to build the community. So that's treating people who've got drug addiction, building up community groups. And because it's worked so well in those pilot areas, today we're announcing that together with the National Police Chiefs Council, we're rolling this out across the whole country to apply this successful approach nationwide and make sure these organised criminal gangs end up where they belong, which is in prison.
And where were the trial areas, Minister?
Well, there were 6 trial areas. The ones that were the most successful, the 2 that I mentioned, Merseyside and West Yorkshire. And in fact, in the West Yorkshire example, when the police first sort of started policing the particular estate very heavily, they found the community were quite resistant to working with them. Once the police had demonstrated they could successfully arrest and lock up the organised criminal gangs, and they could support the local community, when they, at the end of the trial, came to arrest someone, actually the local community were actively supporting them and even sort of cheering them as they did so, which is quite a sort of turnaround, not just in terms of reducing crime, but community relations as well. And it's because of that success we're now going to roll it out across the whole country.
Well, congratulations to the men and women and the officers on their command in that success, and let's hope it works nationwide. If I can take you to other stories, you might have seen the front page of the Times. This is the Met Police, as you'll be aware, in special measures, of course, are hiring without face-to-face interviews of potential candidates. Now, after the David Carrick case, you wrote an article for The Express last week where you said it's not a lone case. We've seen other officers accused and convicted of misogyny, homophobia and racism, as well as sexual assault and even murder. This has to stop. You can't be happy with the Met hiring people without face-to-face interviews, Minister.
Well, I think it's worth just clarifying that the Times article itself does make clear that there are face-to-face contacts. There are face-to-face role-playing exercises designed to understand the candidate's motivation and capabilities, and there are face-to-face medical examinations as well. So just to be clear, no one was getting hired without face-to-face contact.
In-person interviews were abandoned by police forces nationally as an emergency measure during the coronavirus. Most have brought them back, except for the Met, is what the Times says.
That's right. That's right. And my view as police minister is they should bring them back as quickly as possible. And my understanding is that is precisely what they're going to do.
Well, they've said they'll reintroduce the face-to-face element later this year.
Yeah, well, they should do that as soon as possible. But we do need to be clear with your listeners that there were face-to-face role-playing exercises and there were face-to-face medical examinations as well. On the wider question of vetting, I mean, yes, you're right. There are significant issues with vetting. That was laid out in an inspector's report a couple of months ago, and we've seen those 2 appalling cases, Wayne Couzens and then Carrick, last week. And in response to that, we've asked the College of Policing to bring forward new vetting guidelines, which they're going to be doing by next month. All 43 of the inspectors' recommendations on vetting are being implemented. We're conducting a review of police dismissals. So this is basically making sure that if a chief constable encounters an officer who's committing misconduct or is not performing properly, they can be more easily removed. So that whole range of of work will make, I think, standards in policing higher and will stop this sort of thing happening again.
I mean, as policing minister, you'll be aware how many police forces in the country are under special measures, won't you?
I believe it's 6, isn't it?
It is 6, absolutely right. And in most of those, or some of those, if the chief constable or the commissioner seeks to dismiss an officer, in some cases they can be reinstated. You'll be aware in the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, the commissioner, has enormous concerns about this because he can say, I want Police Constable Ferrari out, and I get reinstated. That can't be right, Minister.
Yeah, so in fact, when I was first appointed about 3 months ago, I had a conversation with the Commissioner, Mark Rowley, on my very first day in post, and he raised that concern with me in our very first phone call. And that's why then in my first or second week, I asked officials in the Home Office to initiate work on this review that will affect it, which I mean, obviously, I don't want to prejudge the results, but the objective is to allow chief constables like Commissioner Rowley, but other chief constables as well, to be better able to remove people who they think should not be serving in their police force. So I took action on that within a couple of weeks of being appointed. We announced it publicly last week, and the work has now started. So we are on that.
OK. This question should really probably be addressed to the Home Secretary, but I have to get a word from you because of your position. The story of the asylum seeker who was found guilty of murdering a Royal Marine had previously killed 2 people before conning his way into this country by posing as a child. He was 21. He posed as 14 and managed to con the border force. Again, not quite your brief, but you are policing minister. What can you tell my listeners to reassure them this won't happen again, or you'll do your best endeavours to ensure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, well, it is a terrible case, and I discussed it with the Immigration Minister last night in anticipation that the question may come up. This really illustrates, I think, this case that you've just laid out illustrates why we need reform, legal reform. And as the Prime Minister said, I think before Christmas, we are going to be introducing, or the Home Office will be introducing an illegal immigration bill to get a lot tougher on people who enter the country illegally, where they enter the country from a safe place. This gentleman, I believe, crossed over from France on a ferry. France is a safe country. There is no need to illegally enter the United Kingdom from France to claim asylum. You can perfectly safely do so in France. And as you say, he posed as a 14-year-old and I think together with his immigration lawyers strung out the process for years before it was finally discovered that he was an adult. And in fact, he'd been in a school, I think, in the meantime, which also demonstrates why we need to have much more robust, tougher age assessment methods, including scientific.
Minister, what would those age assessment methods be?
So at the moment, age assessments are done by essentially a social worker interviewer. What we need to introduce, I believe, are scientific age assessment methods. There are a variety used in other European countries, including X-rays of certain bones like the wrist. There are various more innovative, modern scientific physical age assessment techniques as well. And what the Immigration Minister will be doing, I understand, is pretty quickly introducing those scientific physical age assessment techniques here in the United Kingdom. I think other European countries use them. We need to use them as well. And this case is a very, very powerful illustration of why we need to do that.
OK, last couple of questions. I wonder if I can just run you through some of the background of some of your senior colleagues. We have a Prime Minister who's received his second fixed penalty notice in 9 months, the first when he was Chancellor. This is, of course, for not wearing his seatbelt. A Deputy Prime Minister who's being investigated for multiple allegations of bullying. The chairman of the party being investigated over his tax affairs. The Home Secretary had to originally resign for leaking restricted information. And I've not even mentioned your Conservative colleague who's suspended after comparing the vaccines to the Holocaust. I speak of Andrew Bridgen. What does that speak of the Conservative Party today?
Well, I think you've seen Rishi Sunak as the new Prime Minister acting decisively when serious questions have arisen about colleagues. You've mentioned two of the examples.
Last Wednesday,
well, yeah, and then,
PMQs,
and then further.
Dealt with.
That's right, he did. And then further information came into the public domain over the weekend, I think some of which was voluntarily disclosed by Nadeem Zahawi himself. And when that information came out into the public domain over the weekend, within 24 or 48 hours, the Prime Minister referred the matter to the independent investigator into ethics to make sure we properly get to the bottom of this. So we've got a Prime Minister here who has said very clearly Ethics and integrity in public life matter a lot to him. And when questions have arisen about his colleagues, and you've mentioned 2 examples, he's quickly and decisively appointed an independent investigator, which is what the public would expect to happen.
Does this speak to integrity and accountability to you, Minister?
Well, I think the fact the Prime Minister, in both those cases, has rapidly appointed an independent investigator shows that he is serious about dealing with this issue. So, yes, it does.
Which is more embarrassing, do you think? A former Prime Minister and leader of the party who needs to use the chairman of the BBC as a financial fixer, or a former Chancellor of the Exchequer who can't get his tax sums right? Which is more embarrassing to you personally?
Well, look, as I say, they're being looked at by different people. The first example is being looked at by William Shawcross in the context of the appointments process, and the independent investigator is looking at the second. So they are being properly investigated. That's the right thing to do. That will maintain public confidence. In the meantime, what I'm doing is concentrating on hiring 20,000 extra police officers. So by March of this year, we'll have more police officers than we've ever had in our country's history. The Chancellor's, working hard on making sure. The PwC last week found the UK was the 3rd best place in the world to invest, behind only the US and China. So we're concentrating on working on these important issues which are critical to the future of the country. That's our priority.
Lastly, reminding the listeners that you once served as Minister for London, can I put the ULEZ plans for later this year to you? And it's now been discovered that tradespeople could face yearly bills of more than £3,000 under Mayor Khan's planned ULEZ expansion, mostly due to a lack of compliant vans for sale and people putting up the prices of such vans. Again, as a former Minister for London, isn't there a real danger people are going to be forced out of business if there's no delay or review of ULEZ? Minister?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what Sadiq, I represent an outer London constituency, Croydon South, and I think what Sadiq Khan has done with this ULEZ is absolutely shocking. He appears to have fiddled the consultation, thrown away a load of answers he didn't like the sound of. He's ignored the opinion of Londoners. I collected a petition in Croydon South, 5,000 people opposed to it. This is the worst possible time to be, with a cost of living crisis across the Western world, to be slapping people, often on lower incomes, because it's the older cars that are going to get charged for. So people on lower incomes are going to have those older vehicles, slapping them with up to, I think it's £3,000 or £4,000 a year in charges just for driving around is completely unacceptable. It's the wrong time to do it. I know there are valid concerns with air quality, but there are other things you can do to address that. For example, instead of spending all the money putting up these cameras to try and catch people, spend the money on improving the electric car charging infrastructure so more people are able to make the choice to use electric cars. That would help London's air without penalising people on low income. So I totally oppose what Sadiq Khan has done. He's ignoring Londoners. This is completely the wrong time to do it. And a number of Conservative London boroughs, including Croydon, I think, are looking at legally challenging what he's doing. Some Conservative London boroughs are saying they're going to refuse to put up the cameras, and I completely support those Conservative London boroughs in doing that.
Grateful for your time. Croydon South MP and Crime and Policing Minister Chris Philp appearing here on LBC. 2 minutes after 8 News is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a report has revealed probation failings that left